I don't know. In the CBC today, they're talking about a lake in British Columbia. There's a mine wants to come in there, and they want to perhaps take over the lake. And what's the value of that lake if the community now has a reason to thrive and bring new jobs in? We're only going to lose one lake. We have lots of other lakes in British Columbia. If you want to go see those are the best things. Here it's a little different. We don't have lots of coastal environments, not of this scale. So I guess perhaps the final thing I want to leave here is that, is the risk worth the value? Or are there better ways to deal with this? I had the pleasure of talking to the environmental sustainability class today. It's a program at Western, a graduate program for people that have already obviously got a degree in some other faction, and they are looking for novel ways to bring society or bring answers to our environmental problems. It was very interesting. We talked a little bit about the oceans today, and I gave them this task. How do you solve the oil spill problem? How do you solve this eutrophication or the change in the environment? And it was very clear to them, I think, that you don't look at the ocean to solve the problem. You turn around and you look at the land. You look at the people all along the Mississippi, how we make decisions on how much can go into the environment, how much that river can hold, what the capacity of this environment really is. But it's not a science question anymore. It's a question about choices. And Canadians have this choice as well. Perhaps it's, I'm not talking as a scientist, just want to make sure you bring it up. What happens if a spill like this occurs in the north? Well, I have ideas, but should we allow it? What's the value of the north? What's the value of those northern oil? We already know how we value lakes and rivers in Alberta. Are we to apply the same rules to the north? Now, what's the chances of having skimmers up there? What's the chances of having this material ever removed by heat, by evaporation, by light? I'd say it's an enormous risk. Let's skip that. Okay, last thing. Okay, really we've learned that, among other things, cleaning it up only makes us feel better. And in fact, there may be a health risk associated with cleaning it up. Certainly there's a risk of it getting into the food chain and making big changes. The oil, regardless of how we feel we're doing, is going to remain for a long time. Now, it may not remain in the Gulf, it may go all the way across Florida, off the Gulf Stream, but it's in the environment. There was a substantial modification of that whole ecology that has lasted for decades in the Gulf, in Alaska. The warmer temperatures of the Gulf of Mexico may mean it doesn't last that long. Or maybe it means it lasts longer. No one knows. Okay? My favorite thing, environmental amnesia. I bet you forgot about it already, but no. Okay? The livelihood of the community, the relationship they have with that environment will be lost. And it may be lost forever, and we'll never remember that it existed, or it may only be lost for a period of time. But this is the key thing. We have to remember what the relationship used to be. And again, we need a really honest criteria of success. Okay, we can't ask BP, go out and measure how much oil is there, and tell us how you're doing. We're doing pretty good. We had a Corexit and the numbers, it all disappeared. Okay, not a good strategy. We need, whether it's the US or Canada, whether they're valuable to us, whether that's the type of ocean we want to have for our future and for our future generations. So with that, I really appreciate you coming out tonight, so thank you.
We have some time for some questions, so I'd like to open it up.
Well, again, The easy answer is to choose something from the oceans, right? Okay, I'm going to say, let's make sure correct sits off the market. Nobody's allowed to use it. And let's make sure that the cleanup is done by individuals that are not part of the oil industry. That's the easy one. But the harder one is, maybe these 4,000 oil rigs should just be, our Stonehenge, something that we don't understand. Why were they there? We don't need that oil anymore. They should be all removed and use a lot less plastic. So one of the strategies for our class today, I suggested that, we've made a big change over the last couple of years where if you go to Loblaws or any of the big stores, they're charging you a nickel for the plastic bags. Now, okay, a nickel. Why don't you get them to charge us $1? Okay, that's going to use a lot less plastic. Okay, it's going to offend everybody, but the point simply is that, we can probably wean ourselves, if we can't wean ourselves off plastic, we will have to in, the next two generations, or next 20 years even, depending on who you read right now, even now.
Well, we need to wean ourselves off shrimp when we go to Florida this winter, because I see the road there, the well was barely tapped and the fishing were pulling up shrimp, and they're wondering themselves whether they're safe. I was wondering why they would even go out and fish that way.
Well, you have to remember that seafood that's contaminated is contaminated with light oils in general. And again, that's probably annoying. Probably doesn't taste very good, but perhaps it's not as dangerous as one thinks. Nobody, at least tourists, they can eat a few of these things and still be fine. Now, right? I'm flippant on this, but as a young man, way back in the Pleistocene, I had a job working for Fisheries and Oceans. And it was involving a lake in northern Manitoba that was part of a hydroelectric dam project. The issue was simply this: when they elevated the lake levels to start the flow down the hydroelectric path, they contaminated all the fish with mercury. Okay, we discovered this, and it immediately went higher than the Canadian food standards. Well, that of course caused some concern in the First Nations community, because now their livelihood was gone, but somebody, I don't know, in Winnipeg or Ottawa came up with this great idea. The US standards are higher than ours. So why don't we just ship them to Chicago? And for 2 years, Chicago had this Canadian whitefish sale, okay? Every restaurant sold Canadian whitefish. We took our mercury problem and distributed it through the bodies of all the Chicagoans, okay? So I know NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, is sampling the shrimp. And again, remember, this is not evenly distributed through the bay. And they are assessing the shrimp to make sure that there are no, or that the levels meet some seafood safety standard. The people from NOAA that are in charge of this were the same people that were working on our project on the West Coast. They are the most credible people I've ever met. So I think if you go down and have a bowl of gumbo or whatever shrimp comes in, you should be fine.
I just wanted to question one of your statistics. You mentioned that the question of whether drilling in the Gulf is worth it given the amount that is produced, and I think you said what production is it from?
Yeah, the numbers go from a few days to a couple weeks.
Well, I heard other numbers, and I have a BlackBerry, and I Googled it, and I'm getting different. The statistic is that in 2007, 25% of U.S. oil consumption was produced in the western Gulf of Mexico, and 14% of the U.S. natural gas consumed in the U.S.
Yeah, well, that may be. And again, if you look at...
All I mean is that if that's right, the trade-off of not drilling is quite a more difficult question, because you have that much more production coming out of it.
Well, and of course, you know, the numbers of wells that are being allowed over the last few years and the onput of oil from those wells have escalated. I mean, of course, you know, it's an exponential growth. There was you know, I can't remember, I mean, I'm trying to visualize the figure, but in the summertime they had the number of wells that were there over the last few years. If you talk 5 years ago, and that may be where I'm getting the number from, but there were about a quarter of the number of wells than they are now.
Some of those wells are producing, they aren't being drilled. Aren't those platforms just, they're over wells that have been drilled that are producing, and there are other platforms that are actually drilling platforms?
Yeah, and again, I'm not privy to whether they're producing or not. But it is a good number to understand what you know, if it's you know, 10% or 14%, it does matter for making that decision.
But it's 25%.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, thank God for Google. Yeah, I mean, but I guess the way to look at it, just to make sure, 25%. Percentages are always a little disconcerting because the amount of oil that you use changes as well. So if I would like to know barrels, I guess, or we know that the average American uses 25 barrels of oil a year. Okay.
I think the daily consumption of oil in the United States is 22 million barrels per day. So the spill in the Gulf is 5 million barrels per day, which is 25% of the consumption in the United States in one day. And the production in the United States is about 6.5 million barrels a day. So they produce 6 or 7 million of the 22 million they consume. And 25% of the total they consume, I think, is produced in the Gulf, which is close to, well, it's 80% of what the country produces.
I wish I could have followed that a little better because anyways, it's a good argument, but it again gets down to the decision. Is this a good thing or not?
And I don't disagree with the point you're making. I just mean that if all of a sudden they said we're going to stop producing in the Gulf, there would be a great deal of oil that would have to come from some other source.
Yep, no, I agree.
We would be on ours, because that oil is going to the U.S. so that the oil companies are exporting it. We don't know that, and it's about the same back.
Yeah, I don't think the U.S. is a particularly enthusiastic exporter of oil. So, yeah, again, you know, I know there are oil economists that could come in here and probably solve all our problems in, 10 minutes of discussion. So, but you know, we're basing on, a biologist thinking about oil. Okay, there's a limit to the technology, I know.
You mentioned a couple of ways that we could approach cleaning up surface oil spills, such as absorbent pads, or for example, skimming it off and burning it. How could those be applied to the situation in Mexico, where the oil is 100 meters below the surface? Could they still be used?
No, they can't be. It's got to be on the surface. It's got to be removed physically from the surface. I don't know how to handle that blob at 3 kilometers deep. Okay, but the blob at 3 kilometers deep is really going to have a big impact on the benthos and the bottom parts of the ocean. It's worth dealing with. I anticipate that somebody's going to try to inject it with something. Corrects it? Bacteria. I mean, there's ideas here. And if it sits there, maybe you have to do something about it rather than it sitting there. I don't know. Greg, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask you your comment on the fact that BP just won the Ig Nobel Prize for proving that oil and water actually do mix.
Oh, okay. Well. Yeah, with a little help from detergent, they mix really well. So.
I have a question about what you're talking about, raw sewage in going into the oceans eventually. And what can we do? Like, does London's raw sewage, do they not treat their sewage? Like, this is something I think we as people of London should know about. What is happening with our sewage?
I'm absolutely convinced that London treats its sewage. If I remember correctly, there was a sewage spill of some sort not that long ago. So it says that, that it doesn't naturally escape our sewage treatment plant. But the sewage treatment plants in general are doing, are in many places, especially in freshwater systems, because the capacity of a lake to handle, or the river to handle our sewage is way too small. Coastal environments, not so much. Montreal put its waste into the St. Lawrence estuary for decades. Only 10 years ago did they have sewage treatment plants put in. So inland places generally treat sewage. Some of the sewage is animal sewage, obviously not treated. Maybe we can protect our waterways. Sewage?
When does it dissolve and disappear?
Well, it doesn't dissolve and disappear. It's consumed. Okay, it's broken down, and it doesn't last a long time, but it's constantly being replaced. But it gets back to this: who's consuming it? Bacteria are consuming it. I think bacteria that consume it require oxygen, and in doing so, it puts an oxygen stress on the system, which is what's happening here. So if you stop putting sewage in there, how long would it last? I don't know, I'm guessing, but a season. Okay, but it's that constant replenishment. It's like, growing yogurt again. Constantly replenishing it and allowing it to grow.
You said that the oxygen is out of the water. Can you tell by looking at it, or is it just that there's no fish in it?
No, it's actually like this one, it's deep. So you see it off the shelf and it moves up and down the coast. And so you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't see any ramifications for it. But as oceanographers, we have no idea why it exists. In this one, we have an idea, that constant replenishment of sewage. In that one, it's not so clear. Is it a natural phenomenon? Maybe, absolutely. It has nothing to do with humans doing something in Oregon that has damaged the environment.
How effective are organizations like Council for Canadians and Greenpeace?
Oh, that's a tough question. I would say that I don't want to talk about any one group. I'm not trying to avoid your answer, but let me tell you a small story about this afternoon. Talking to the environmental and sustainability students, one of them had a really interesting point, that they felt that they were aliens on campus. They were aliens in their roommates thought they were the nut bars. That they had this view that we could make a difference and a change. And they could not really understand why so few people accepted them. And this includes family members, and again, roommates, family members, just everybody around them, they seemed to feel this fear. And I gave them an answer, which was probably, it's kind of like, keep up the good work, that type of thing. But the real answer should have been something, I hope anyways, is that our relationship with the environment has changed so much compared to, say, 10 years ago or our parents' generations, that they are leading a race. And by leading the race, they shouldn't be wondering why everybody else is following them and not with them. And so we do need people that have the compassion and the vision to be kind of the nut bars to stand out there and to say something. So places like, organizations like Greenpeace, they tend to be out on the edge. But if you don't agree, and you may not agree with their behavior, their attitudes, but maybe they're leading something that we should be thinking about. If they say, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to, tie myself to a whale, and you might say, that seems a little odd. But maybe we should say, why are they picking, why do they choose whales? What is it about the whales that we really have forgotten? That we're down to 10% of most of the right whales. We're at 15% of many of the sperm whales. That's that amnesia thing. We still see whales. Well, we still see whales, but the numbers are lower. So maybe we need groups that are the nut bars. Maybe we need students like we have in the class that are willing to do the leadership, to do the mentoring, to run the race, to make sure we all listen. So I think they can be quite effective. Matter of fact, I think without them, we may not have enough kind of inertia to make some of the decisions that we think we should probably have to make. Because where are we going to get our information from? Where do we get leadership for making social change? Well, we don't, regardless of your political stripe, it's not going to come from political leaders. Well, it's going to come from you, and you, and you, and you. You talking to people, everybody talking to individuals. Almost all major social changes comes from a grassroots. I don't see why this one won't be different. Okay?
We have time for one more question.
I'm just wondering, maybe comment, when the milfoil spill started, it seemed that the Environmental Protection Agency was against the use of Corexit. And if it's so obvious that we shouldn't be using it, how were they convinced by the oil companies to, and how come all of the experts allowed them to use it to
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest hot potato here, other than the oil spill, is the use of Corexit. Matter of fact, the gentleman in the back, we were having a small discussion to start with. He was learning today that Corexit may not be as damaging as people believe. Ecotoxicological studies from 20 years ago suggest it is quite damaging. Though, there's still some question about this. It may also be an issue of at what point does EPA be responsible for the big oil spills, or what chance are they for just coastal environments? I don't know the answer. But EPA may have a mandate go from the land to 100 yards out. Okay, I'm not actually being facetious. I'm trying to say that they have a limited capacity. If they can protect the shorebirds, they can protect the shores and the benthos, they're doing a better job than they can if they have to take their limited resources and do the whole spill. So I'm not sure how the decisions were made. I do not think it's a good idea, just for all the reasons we pointed out. It limits our ability to remove the oil. It enhances the ability of oil getting into the system. And historically, it's shown to have damaging of the organisms that we want in that ecosystem. Okay, thanks.
Professor Tripp, your presentation.